Hello, this is the content video for Environmental Science 2.3. We are going to look at the air and water quality of different regions in relation to the socioeconomic status of its population, as well as looking at the competing interests for limited water resources by industry, which is corporations, or geographic or ethnic groups, and the role that that can play in global conflicts. So, real quick, this is a map on the left and the right that is based on county size. So, each of those different squares or trapezoids or polygons is a county in the US. Sometimes those are called parishes, depending on where you're at. The left map, the pinkish red one, shows poverty rates in the United States by county based on 2008 records. That is the most up to date map I could find at the recording of this. If I find a new one, the slides may change, but this recording isn't going to be re recorded. I have a feeling the data won't change that much. If anything, it might get darker red. So, the population areas that have a lower amount of income, the poorer areas, are going to be darker red, while those that are lighter red have less poverty rate by percentage of population. All right. A couple of things to note there are that if there's only 100 people in a area, it will take less actual individuals to make the area be more or less impoverished. The map on the right is a large, it's got a lot of data behind it. This is a general environmental quality map of the US based on percentile. So these are percentile rankings, a lot like your standardized tests may give percentile results. The darker red, the worse it is, and the darker blue, the better general environmental quality it is. That doesn't mean hospitable, though. Look at the northern part of Alaska, right? Right here. You're not living up there. It just means it's less despoiled by human interactions with it, right? Same thing for some parts here in the central Midwest. Not a lot of people live there, but does have a high environmental quality. Same for Hawaii. Not as many people living there. So same map on the left. I'm going to move my face a little so that I'm blocking the legend, but it's the same legend as we were looking at a couple of seconds ago. So if you need to pause the recording and go back to look at it, that's all right. The one on the right, however, is now talking about air quality. And this is again by county, so those shades still line up the same. And this is given a letter ranking, A, B, C, D, or F, based on quality of air, with A being the best, F being the worst, just like grades. Everybody gets that concept. So you want to be a blue, not a F. There are not a lot of blues in the air quality regions, right? So again, we're going to we're going to start looking at a little bit more specific here. So air quality can be impacted by pollutants in factories and industry. It can also be impacted by a larger number of people living in the same location. Remember that every time you drive your car, you are helping, or rather hurting, the environment because you are giving off pollutants, unless you're driving an electric vehicle, which that's a whole nother concept, but I don't think that applies to a lot of my viewers. So if we're looking at this area along the northeastern coast, where there is a very high population density, we can see that the air is very, very bad. However, most of the people do not live in poverty, right? This is a very lighter pink, and this is by percent. So there could still be a large number of people who are below the poverty line. It's just that the average is not below the poverty line, right? Remember, we're at less than 5% if it's this light pink below the poverty line. So a lot of this is above the poverty line. Whereas we have areas like the northeastern part of Arizona where there's not a lot of people. There are a lot of folks below the poverty line, but if we're looking over here, it is a D ranking. And continuing through Arizona to the other side, the Southwest, it's an F ranking. And continuing through California, large portions of California have very poor air quality. A lot of this is due to the environmental factors that are there, but also with the populations and factories that are out west. Note how the Rust Belt in Detroit and Chicago here, there are some red parts and there's some yellow parts, but there's also a couple of green counties where they are not seeing as much air quality problems. And similarly, in 2008, not as much of it was in the poverty line. The northern part of Louisiana, southern part of Arkansas, and western part of Mississippi here on the left map and here on the right map. There are a very, very large number of individuals and a large portion of the population that are below poverty line and well below poverty line, right? Less than 40%. Over here, we see some air quality difference, but not as much as we might expect. If you go to southern Ohio and western Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia, eastern and the west part of Virginia here, there's a lot of coal mines there. And the coal mine, the production of coal and the burning of coal, which is a large power source, right? Electrical energy through the burning of coal, has hampered air quality. All right. My face is only blocking part of Hawaii, so I'm just going to shrink down a little bit here if I can manage it. There we go. So this is a twofold map, and it can be a little confusing to read. So let's make sure we take a look at the key, which I've retyped. So the tan, orange, brown color here to darker black is the increasing number of water violations. So these are reports of water quality laws being broken. The light to blue, and it overlaps to a dark black, show an increase in population of color. That's the words they used, not me. So these are percentage of minorities and percentage of water violations on the same map. I know that's a little confusing, but this is the only one where I could get good data representation on a county basis. So it's the same concept as the last couple, right? These were broken down by county, broken down by county, broken down by county. So we're looking at the same data samples, right? So our groupings are the same. So you can see that there are a lot of water violations in the eastern Midwest, as well as all of the Western population pretty much here. So we've got a large number of people of color, and as you can see, the darker portions of that, lots of water violations. So lots in Texas, lots in Arizona, New Mexico, California has some, and the East Coast here near the harbors and factories. Florida has a lot on its East Coast, not as many on its West Coast. So I want you to take a couple of seconds, pause the video here, and look at this map and make a couple hypotheses. We're not going to test these hypotheses, right? We don't have time or energy for that, really. But about why you think water quality may be changed based on the population's color or the number or percentage of minority peoples in that area. So just think about it, right? I want you to do one or two concepts. All right, so you should have paused the video there and done that. If you didn't, shame on you, but obviously I have no way of telling. YouTube doesn't track those metrics, and neither does the LMS. A large portion of this, and I am saying this as a white Anglo-Saxon male in my 30s, environmental racism is one of the larger culprits here. And our definition for that is going to be a pattern of development that exposes poor people, so the impoverished, those who live below the poverty line, especially minorities, people of color on that previous map, to environmental hazards. All right, those environmental hazards can include air quality and water quality, like we've looked at. They could also be land being polluted through the buildup of trash or dumping of environmental waste or nuclear waste. This is a very popular editorial cartoon from about 10 to 15 years ago now, at the time of the recording, of a minority impoverished person looking at a FEMA's guide to avoiding disaster. Step 1 is to gather up emergency rations of food, water, and clothing, and step 2 is move to a rich white neighborhood. Obviously, this has a lot of layers of nuance in it. I'm not going to go exploring a whole lot of it. I'll leave that to your English teachers and to the history teachers. I'm mainly pointing out that this is something that happens. It is not a good thing. All right, so a couple examples of that are North Carolina pig farms. North Carolina pig farms, there's actually been studies done on this, and I can point them to them. If you send me an email, I'll give you the sources. There are up to 9 times as many pig farms in counties with lower socioeconomic status than those with higher socioeconomic status. And that doesn't sound like a huge problem until you start thinking about pig farms as a source of pollution, right? Pig farms have the problem of a lot of methane given off by the pigs, as well as waste, solid and liquid, given off by the pigs. That's not only a problem with where does all that waste go, but that waste smells. If you've ever driven through North Carolina, you've probably smelled a pig farm. I did that over the summer when I visited some family, and I can tell you that it was very evident when the highway passed by a pig farm. You could smell it even with the air conditioning on and the windows rolled up, traveling at 70 miles an hour. So think about the inverse of that statement. There are 1/9 as many pig farms in counties with higher socioeconomic status. So richer neighborhoods, those that are more affluent with more money in them, have less pig farms around them. So if you are rich enough, if you make enough money, you don't have to live near pig farms and experience the smell and problems that accompany them. Second example, 64% of people living within 1 mile of oil and gas wells are in areas facing the worst environmental health threats are Hispanic or Latino. So oil and gas wells, I'm going to move the view to the maps that we were looking at earlier, right? So oil and gas farms are going to be in the southwestern part of the U.S., right? So this part, we've got, in general, especially along the border, more people being impoverished. The general environmental quality is not great, right? The highest color here we're seeing is this green, and it's in the 20th to 40th percentile, which means only 20% of the environment, the area, right, by these blocks, their counties or parishes, are better than that. So not too bad, but we've got some areas of New Mexico or Arizona and some of California that are saying that 80 to 95% of the area in the rest of the US is better than the environment here. Looking at air quality, and I know my face is in the way, I'm going to move out of the way, is it's tied to similar things, right? California, Arizona, parts of New Mexico are getting Ds on air quality, a D. Some parts are getting a C. Texas, highest it's getting is a C. There's not a lot of wells down along the border. I did look that up. They're getting Bs. There's also a nice river that flows through there, San Antonio River. Looking at the water quality and percentage of color in the population, again, we're seeing this whole area, lots of very, very dark colors, right? This darker blue, black means a high population of color and a high number of water violations. So lots of issues. All right. Moving on, I'm going to move my face again so that you can see. This is a map of the upper and lower basins of the Colorado River watershed. All right, and we'll talk about that in a second. So, water conflicts. It is almost a misnomer to think that people go to war over water anymore. In history, that has been a thing. Like, we're not denying that people ever fought wars over water sources. We're just saying, in general, now, especially larger conflicts, don't get resolved that way. Usually on a national scale, or in the US on a state scale, these are solved through very peaceful political alignments. So, agreements for trade, agreements for other things, especially with fisheries. Much more, I don't want to say normal, right? But reasonable solutions are usually implemented. There hasn't been an actual war for water in quite a long time, as far as I could find. A lot of times, this is based in food importation as well. A lot of countries aren't able to keep up with their own water needs because that would mean they're also growing all of their food. Like growing wheat and growing grains takes a lot of water. But if you import those grains, you don't have to have that water in your country. That water could be somewhere else in another country. So having this water cost being embedded in your importation of food sources, especially grains and meats, means you don't have to have the water yourself. Other places could have water. Now, if we shift that and look at a smaller scale, a local or regional, we start to see that corporations tend to fare better than people when water rights are concerned. We're going to look at Nestle's impact on water rights in a few different locations through looking at an excerpt from an article somebody wrote that it was well sourced. And that was written at the beginning of this year, so it's fairly recent as far as articles are concerned. And I'll leave that for a later time, not as part of this video, since we're at about 20 minutes. All right. Indigenous peoples conflicts, those can resort to violence, and they have resorted to violence. A few of the more well documented cases are herder-farmer conflicts in Nigeria, where people who are growing crops versus people who are shepherding livestock are conflicting over water rights. So sources of water like wells and rivers and clean water in ponds and lakes are actually coming to blows over that. There's also in Sudan nomadic conflicts between clans or tribes. I don't actually know the right word to use there. It may just be I'm just going to stick with people groups are fighting over access to clean water. Here in America, we have seen a lot of problems with the Colorado River over the past 150 years because, as you can see in the watershed, remember, watershed is all the area that the water feeds to in a specific source. So if we're looking at the Colorado River, it starts way up in the Rockies, right? This is in the heights of the Rockies and flows downstream through multiple dams and the Grand Canyon and empties out into the Gulf of California, which empties into the Pacific Ocean. It's like down here off map though. So if you say the Glen Canyon Dam, if it took a lot of water and stopped water flowing out of the mountains, that's actually what the upper basin refers to, the fact that it's up in the mountains. Everybody who was downstream would have less water. That includes parts of California, which get water from the Colorado River, all of Arizona, which gets all of its water from the rivers that feed into this Colorado River, and from a few aquifers. Same as California. California has its own aquifers. If we had Nevada taking a lot of water out of the river at the Hoover Dam and feeding it into its own agricultural needs, its own city needs, like the city of Las Vegas, which does get most of its water from the Hoover Dam, they could similarly disenfranchise people living south who get their water from the Colorado River. A lot of agriculture that's done here takes its water from the Colorado River. So if you are upstream, you can steal water from those people who are downstream. So a lot of political maneuvering and interstate trade has occurred, and national law has centered around just the flow of water here in this one region of the U.S. And granted, this does cover a lot of space. Look at the size of this scale here, right? We're at 300 miles, almost 500 kilometers here. It's a big area. All right, so we looked at the air and water quality in relation to the socioeconomic status. Remember, socioeconomic status is effectively just talking about the wealth of people groups, but it's also talking about the skin tone, unfortunately, of people groups. So in the US, air quality is lower in areas with more people below the poverty line on average. That, like we said, there are some places and people groups that this flips, right? It's different. But we can also say in the United States, water quality is lower in areas with more individuals of color. We also looked at the fact that larger scale competition for limited water resources is generally peaceful now. It wasn't always this way, but it is generally peaceful now. However, when we start getting into local problems, it gets more complicated and it does come to blows with either war or battles being fought over access to water. If you want a little bit more on that, I highly recommend Googling the war over Toledo between Ohio and Michigan, especially if you also like OSU Michigan football, because the rivalry kind of stems back to there. But I don't want to take up more of your time since this is our longest video. Have a good day, and if you have questions, feel free to send me an email at jbaker@zenithacademy.org. Reach out if you have questions so that I can help you.